Hello everyone. Hope you all are doing well and keeping safe during these tough times. Welcome to this session, which is called SPFX CI/CD using GitHub Actions. Right. Before beginning this session, I would like to thank all the organizers for organizing this event. So thank you very much for doing this, organizers. It has been very helpful to everyone, to all the attendees and speakers. So thank you very much for that. I would also like to thank all the sponsors of the event: ScriptRunner, Global, Driving Data Quality, Proximo, Redspire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. So thank you everyone for sponsoring the event, because without these sponsors, the event would not have been possible. Right. My name is Anoop Tatti. I'm a developer at a company called Content Plus Cloud based in London, United Kingdom. You can follow me on Twitter under the account Anoop Tells. I also write blogs related to SharePoint and Microsoft 365 on Medium, and the link for my blog post is anoopT.medium.com. Right. Welcome again to this session. So what I've done is I've divided the session into three parts. In the first part, we'll be having a look at the newly introduced GitHub workflow, what a workflow is, and what are the basics of it. In the second part, we'll be looking at creating a couple of workflows, and then in the final part, we'll be looking at using the GitHub Actions that we have designed for Microsoft 365, using the Microsoft 365 CLI, and we'll be seeing how we can use those actions in order to deploy a SharePoint framework solution onto a tenant. Then, if there is time, we'll also have look at. We will also take a look at creating a simple TypeScript action, and then finally we'll wrap up with some of the resources which will be helpful for everyone. Right. GitHub Actions. Now, in order to understand what GitHub Actions are, we must what a GitHub workflow is. So a GitHub workflow, like any other workflow, is a set of tasks that get executed when an event happens in GitHub repository. So these tasks might be, say, to give you an example, let's say when a file is pushed onto a GitHub repository, there might be a task which will send an email to someone saying a file has been pushed, something like that. So to give a bit more detail or history about the GitHub workflow, about 18 months, or I would say a couple of years back, all we could do on GitHub was host the code, and we didn't host the code only. We didn't have the ability to run the code. By that, what I mean is, let's say if we had some code for a web application, we could push the code or host the code onto GitHub. We didn't have the ability to build that code, package it up, and deploy it somewhere to, say, somewhere in Azure, maybe to a web application. Now, with the introduction of GitHub workflows, that running part, which is building, deploying, building, packaging, and deploying it, is possible. I'll keep referring to this, build, package, and deploy these tasks, because they'll form the crux of this presentation. Now, you might be wondering how GitHub do that. How do they provide this ability to run the code? So what GitHub have done is they give us this something called as a host machine, or a machine in cloud, or a space in cloud, which we can use in order to do these tasks of these running tasks, building, packaging, and deploying. We'll come to see a bit more about how all that happens very soon. Right. Now that we have a basic understanding of what a GitHub workflow is, let's look at the different elements in a GitHub workflow. So each GitHub workflow has something. It needs something to trigger. so that is nothing but an event in a GitHub workflow. Say, for example, when something is pushed onto a GitHub repository, the workflow triggers. Or say when there is a pull request, the workflow. So you name an event, and GitHub have specified trigger for it. So, for example, when an issue is open or issue is closed, etc. So you just have triggers for these various events, and depending upon requirement, we can decide what the trigger can be. We can go one level further and say on what branch should this event occur. So, for example, we can decide that the workflow should run when something is pushed onto the develop branch of our repository. So that's the first element of the workflow. The second element is the host machine. So like I said earlier, the running tasks, which is to go back to our example again. Excuse me. To go back to our example again, the tasks that we run are building the code, packaging it up, and deploying. These tasks need to run somewhere, and that's nothing but the host machine. So GitHub provides us this space in cloud for a certain amount of time until the workflow runs, and we can use that space to run our workflow. And this host machine can be either a Windows machine or a Linux machine or a Mac machine. We get the ability to decide what machine it should be, or what operating system on the machine should be present. And the final element of the workflow, or the final elements rather of the workflow, are these tasks. So we can have one or more tasks in a GitHub workflow, and these tasks is where we specify the activities of the workflow. So a task might be very simple, say like running a line of code, or it can be a complex task of, say, multiple lines of code which do the activity that is required. So yeah, those are that's like the structure of the workflow. So we have an event, we have the host machine, and then we have one or more tasks. Now, just to introduce one more concept over here, one or more tasks for something called as job. So each GitHub workflow can have one or more jobs. Yeah. Right. So enough talking. Let's have a look at a simple workflow. Now, what I've done here is I've just put a few screenshots of how to create a workflow. The setup is quite straightforward. All we have to do is go to our GitHub repository, and then we click on the Actions tab, and then all we have to do is click on set up a workflow. And that will create a file for us, which is a YAML file, which will have some information related to the workflow. And once we save that, the workflow is ready. And then GitHub also gives us a nice ability to view the output of the workflow. Right, now let's go on to a GitHub repository and create a simple workflow. So if I just switch to my browser, this is my GitHub account, and if I click on repositories, what I've done is I've just created a repository for this particular session, called it as Scottish Summit demo, and this repository has only one file at the moment, but you can imagine that, just imagine that this is a complex repository with hundreds and thousands of files. And we will be creating a workflow for this repository. So like I showed in the screenshot, the first thing that we have to do is click on Actions. And what we'll do is we'll just click on New Workflow. And what GitHub does is it presents us with this nice UI wherein we can choose some of the templates for our workflow. Now, let's say if this repository was, say, a TypeScript project or a Node.js project, then GitHub automatically detects what type of project it is, and it gives us some templates that we can choose from. But since this repository does not have any files, we'll just go ahead with this simple workflow. what I'll do is I'll just click on setup the workflow, and GitHub creates this YAML file for us, and that's it. The workflow is created. So let's have a quick look at what these different elements in the workflow are. So if I just zoom in a bit, right? So the first thing is, over here we can see that the trigger that has been specified. In this case, there are a couple of triggers. One is push and the other one is pull request. So what that means is whenever there's a file that is pushed onto this repository, or whenever there's a pull request in this repository on the main branch, then this workflow should run. So that's the trigger. And after that, if I scroll down a bit, I can see that there are jobs specified in the workflow, and there's only one job in this workflow for the moment. It's called build, and then over here we are specifying the host machine. So here we are using Linux, in particular the latest version of Ubuntu. So we will be using that as our host machine. Like I said, we get a couple of other options, Windows or Mac. By default for this workflow, it'll be Ubuntu. Now, if I scroll down further, I can see that there are a few tasks mentioned in this workflow. Now let's ignore the first one for now. Let's take a look at these other simple tasks. So the first one, it's very simple. All it does is it just runs a line of script. Now, since this is our first workflow, we have to print hello world, and that's what this does. This is just a simple bash script which echoes hello world, and then after that we have another task which prints 2 lines of messages. So yeah, that's the workflow in a sense. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and save this workflow file. Now, when I save this file or when I save this workflow, it gets committed onto this repository. So what we are doing in that case is we are pushing a file. So if we push a file, this workflow should run. Now, in the in the real scenario, some other file gets pushed onto the repository, and that's when this workflow runs. But because we are pushing this file, the workflow should run as well. So let me go ahead and commit this file, and once I do that, the file is there. As you can see, it has gone under .github/workflows folder. Now, if I click on Actions again, I should see the workflow running, which it has started, and you can see here with the orange dot. Now, if I click on that, it'll show me what are the different jobs that are running in the workflow. And if I open the job, you can see that the different tasks that have been run in the workflow. Like we saw, there were 2 simple tasks that ran. The first one was just a 1-line script, so it has printed hello world, and the second task was printing a couple of lines, and as you can see, it has done that. Right, so that was a simple workflow. Let's go back to the slides again. So just to recap again, we saw that there was an event, or there were 2 events for this workflow, push and a pull request, and then we specified the host machine as a Linux-based machine, and then there were a couple of tasks in order to print a few lines. Now, in reality, we don't want to just print hello world on our workflow. We want the workflow to do something, right? So if I come back to my example, we want our workflow to build our code, package it up, and deploy it somewhere. So what we can do is maybe instead of writing that 1-line script, we can write a script ourselves, which will go ahead and build the code, and then another script to package the code, and another script to deploy the code. We can write, get all that code and then write it ourselves in the workflow. However, since these tasks, building, packaging, and deploying are common tasks, our fellow developers would have already written that code. So all we can, instead of writing ourselves, we can just consume that code. And this code, which is written by our fellow developers, are nothing but GitHub Actions. So instead of writing the whole code in the workflow of building a repository, packaging it up and deploying, we'll just use the code written by our fellow developers, or we'll use the GitHub Actions written by our fellow developers and consume them in our workflow. Now it will be clearer with an example. What we'll do is we'll take a look at a simple GitHub action that we can consume, and then we'll get more information on what an action is. So if I go back to the browser again, and I'll just go to the code of the repository, go to the workflows folder and open the YAML file, and then let me go ahead and edit this file. So what we'll do is, once the first task runs, which is running the one-line script, we'll go ahead and put the workflow into sleep for some time and then run the next task. So in order to do that, what I can do is maybe I can go ahead and say name and sleep. I can spell that properly, and then I can put run, and then maybe I can write some script over here, some sample script over here, which puts the workflow into sleep. However, since the sleep is a common activity, someone would already written the code for that. So if we just go into this, the link over here, which is GitHub Marketplace, and then I've opened it over here, and then search for sleep, we get some actions that have been created with the code in it. Now, one of our fellow developers has already done that. Now, what we'll do is, instead of writing the code ourselves, we'll just copy this and then put this in our workflow. So if I just go back to my workflow again, and then I'll remove this and then paste it over here. And then with YAML, you have to be a bit careful with the indentation. So pressing different buttons on my keyboard. Hopefully listening. There we go. Right. So yeah, what I've done is I've just copied the code, and then copied the code of the GitHub action, which puts the workflow into sleep, and I've pasted it over here. Now this actions accepts a parameter called as time. Now instead of 10 seconds, we'll just say that as 5 seconds, and then we'll give it a nice name, sleep for 5 seconds. So now we'll go ahead and save this. Again, we are just committing a file onto this repository, which means the workflow should run. So let me go ahead and commit the changes. And if I click on actions again, and then we can see that the workflow has started running. And then click on the build job, and then it will show all the tasks in this workflow. So as you can see, sorry, excuse me. As you can see, the workflow has started running the first task, which is one-line script, and then it goes ahead and prints hello world. After that, we can see that it has run this task, which has put the workflow in sleep for 5 seconds. So which can be seen by the not that one, by the time it took for executing, which was 5 seconds. And after that task, it has run the next task, which is running the multi-line script, and then it has printed 2 lines, and then finally it has run the out-of-the-box tasks, which are just closing the workflow and completing the job. Yeah. So just to recap, if I go back to the workflow file again, what we did was we edited the workflow and added an action, or hooked up an action that was written by our fellow developer into our workflow. So we just referred the action and then specified the parameters for that action. So in that way, the workflow was, workflow went into sleep mode for 5 seconds, and then it ran the next task. Right, so that was creating a GitHub workflow with a GitHub action. Now, before moving on to this slide, let me just explain what Microsoft 365 CLI is, and let me set up the scene and then come to this slide. So, right. Now, let's say if we have a SharePoint framework project in our GitHub repository, and we don't want to, create a workflow which will just print some lines and then just puts the workflow into sleep, etc. We want it to, build this SharePoint framework project, package it up, and then deploy it onto our tenant. Now, in order to do that, we can use something called as CLI for Microsoft 365. Now, if you haven't come across this, you should look into this. I'll be posting a link for this in the resources. Now, CLI for Microsoft 365, it helps us manage our tenant from the command line. So what we can do is we can install it on our machines itself with this simple command npm install PnP CLI Microsoft 365. And then once it is installed, there are some instructions on how to get started, and we can just go ahead and start playing with it. Now, it provides a lot of commands that we can use in order to connect and do some activities with our tenant. So one of the commands is say, status, if I can do that properly. So what that does is if we just say M365 status with some of the parameters or no parameters, it gives the status of the tenant. So we can come to know, if SharePoint is up and running or not, if Power Apps or the Power Platform is up and running, etc. So this is just one of the commands. Now, like this, there are several commands which keep getting updated quite frequently by these CLI for Microsoft 365 team. And yeah, I recommend to you all to install this onto your machines. Now, what we'll do is we'll be making use of this CLI for Microsoft 365 in order to build the SPFX project that we have, package it up and deploy. Now, you might be wondering, if we download this onto our machines, how will GitHub workflow use it? So what we'll be doing is we'll be installing the CLI for Microsoft 365 onto the host machine that is part of our workflow. And then once we have the CLI for Microsoft 365 on our host machine, we can make use of these commands to or the CLI commands in deployment. Now, in particular, we'll be using 3 commands. So the first one is login. So what we'll do is we'll run this command M365 login on our host machine in order to log into the tenant. After that, we'll be using the SPO app deploy and SPO app install commands. And then finally, we'll be using a command called as what was that? Send email, was it? I think it's just okay. Let me just use this one maybe under SPO. Yeah, that one. Mail send. So yeah, that's the one. So SPO mail send, we'll be using this command in order to send an email saying the deployment is complete. Now, like I said, we have a couple of options. We can write all the code ourselves in the workflow. So we can write the code to install Microsoft 365 CLI on the host machine. Then we can write the code to log in to our tenant, write the code to install the app, deploy the app, and send an email. Instead of doing that, what we have done is we've already created the GitHub Actions which do this for us. So if I go back to these slides, what we have done is we've created 3 actions. The first one is called as log. So what this action does is, as over here, it accepts 2 parameters, the username and password, and using those credentials, it logs you in, or it logs us into our tenant. Now, a couple of interesting things to note over here are these two: secrets.admin username and secrets.admin password. Now, what GitHub have done is they have given us the ability to create these secrets at a repository level. So if we go into settings of our repository, we'll find the secrets that we can create. Now, the best part about these secrets is they can be created only once, and after they are created, we cannot edit them. Even the owner, we cannot edit them. We cannot view them. All we can do is only delete them. So they are actually secrets. So that's how it should be. So because this is sensitive information, username and password, these can be stored as in the repository as secrets. Only the workflow will be able to read these secrets. So even apart from the workflow, no one else will be able to read these secrets. Now you might be wondering, if the workflow can read the secrets, we can just write a 1-line script to say echo the secret, maybe echo secret admin username. And now we can try that. I did try that as well, but GitHub is very clever enough, and all you do see is just 3 stars. So they are actually proper secrets. Only the workflow can see them, and no one else. So we'll be making use of those secrets in order to store the username and password, and we'll be passing that username and password to the CLI login action, and that'll make sure that we are logged into the tenant. Now, once we have logged into our tenant, we'll use our next action, which is the deploy to tenant, or deploy app to tenant, which is that one. So we will specify the path to the action, which is actions PnP, which is under the PnP repository, action CLI deploy, and we specify version. And then this particular action accepts 3 parameters. So the first one is the app file path. So this will be the SPFX file that will be created as part of the deployment, and then the next one is skip feature deployment, and finally override. So these are nothing but the common actions that we do with any SharePoint solution, whether we want to skip feature deployment or whether we want to override an already existing solution. Now, this deploy action, what it does is it runs a couple of commands which will go ahead and create the SPFX file. Which will take the SPFX file that has been created and deploy it onto our tenant. We will be seeing it in action very soon. I'll be walking through the details of how this runs in a couple of slides. And then the final action that we have created is called as a run script action. Now, this is a generic action. We can specify any Microsoft 365 CLI script that we want to run as an input to this action, and this action will go ahead and run the script. Now, if I just switch back to the browser, and then if I go into the GitHub Marketplace, and what I've done is I've just searched for Microsoft 365, and then we can see the details of all the actions. Now, let's say if I open this action, it gives us a page which tells what the prerequisites are and how we can use them in our workflow. All we have to do is just copy this and then put it in our workflow. Right. Now, if I just go into the details of the Yeah, sorry. Actually, what I wanted to show here was how we have defined the parameters for the login action. So if I just so this is the definition of the login action. So here we have said accepts two parameters. One is the username and the other one is password. So like I said, each GitHub action can have one or more input parameters. In this particular case, this GitHub action requires two parameters: the admin name, sorry, the username and the password of the admin user. Right, now that we've had a look at the these GitHub actions, let us make use of these GitHub actions in our workflow. So what I've done here is I've got a repository called as PnP call O365 GA. That's a very nice name that I've given to my repository, and this is nothing but a SharePoint framework repository. So it has got a simple SharePoint framework web part. Now our intention is to build and package the code over here and deploy it onto my tenant. So if I just open another browser, and here what I've done is I have logged in with my developer account. So that's the tenant, and I've gone into the app catalog, and then there are some packages, but the package that I am expecting, which is the PnP call GA, is not yet present. So with the workflow, our intention is to create that package and deploy it over here. So if I switch back to my workflow or the repository and go into the workflow, so I have this workflow called SPFX CI CD. And let's quickly run through the different elements in this workflow. So firstly, what I've done here is I've specified the event as or the trigger as push. Now I haven't specified any branch name over here, so this means whenever there's a push event on any branch, this workflow will trigger. And after that, I have specified the host name as Ubuntu latest. And then if I scroll down further, what we have done here is we are just using a couple of other actions. The first one is to set up node. Now, since we have to use node 10.x version, we have to use this action, which will make sure that we are using node version 10. And then the first thing we do is install all the dependencies using the npm CI command. And after that, what we are doing here is the common tasks that we do with any SharePoint framework project, which is gulp, bundle, and package solution. So once we run this, what happens is it will bundle all the files and package it up, and then put that package into the SharePoint/solution folder of this host machine. So that's what this does. And then once that is done, we are calling the Microsoft 365 CLI actions. The first one is the login action. So what we are doing is we're calling this action and then passing a couple of parameters, which is the username and password. After that, we are calling the deploy action. To this, we specify the name of the part to the package where the SPPKG file is. So as you can see, we have specified SharePoint/solution and then the file name to the package. So this one gets created as part of the gulp package solution command. So once the deployment is done, what we do is we just print the ID of the app that gets deployed onto our tenant, and then finally we make use of the run script action, which is that one over there. And then what we are doing here is we are just calling this command, which is m365 SPO mail send, in order to send an email once the deployment is complete. So that's the workflow. Let's go and run this workflow. So what I'll do is in this repository, I'll just go ahead and modify the README file instead of modifying some other file. So let's say that we've modified the code somewhere, and then I'll just go ahead and commit the change. Now, because we have pushed the file onto this repository, the workflow should start running, and there we go. The workflow has started running, and then the job, we have called it as build and deploy. So it has set up the job, and then it is using node version 2.x, sorry, 2.x, 10.x, and then it does the npm CI, which means it installs all the dependencies. So usually, if we are lucky, this should be done very quick, and if the demo gods favor us, we should be done with this demo in a minute. There we go. So it installs all the dependencies. Still taking some time, but the best part about it is it gives us all the information as to what is going on, so we can keep a track of that. And then it does the gulp, bundle, and ship, which means it uses the gulp file and then runs the task specified over there, and then creates the SPPKG file for us with the package command, and then it logs us into our tenant. Now, if I just expand this, you can see that it outputs the admin username and password as 3 stars. So that's how secretive it is. Now, what we're doing is, as part of this login command, we are installing CLI onto our machine. So there's no need for us to explicitly install Microsoft CLI. The login command does that for us. And then what we did was we deployed the package into our tenant, and then we went ahead and sent an email saying the deployment was done. So if I switch back to this developer tenant of mine and then refresh the app catalog, we can see that the new file, the SPPKG file, has been deployed just a few seconds back. And if I go into my email, I can see that I've got an email saying the deployment is complete. Right, so that's how we used GitHub Actions for Microsoft 365 CLI into our GitHub workflow. Right, so if I just quickly see we still have got some time. So just to recap the workflow. So what we did was we had the trigger specified as the push trigger. So whenever a file is pushed onto the repository, the workflow should run, and then we specified the host machine as a Linux-based machine, and then the first task we did was running npm install and then bundle and package. This created the SPPKG file for us, and then we used the Office 365 CLI. Actually, if I just come out of this and then press that button, yeah, then we used the CLI login action for this particular task. So which made sure that we were logged into our tenant, and that particular action also made sure that CLI for Microsoft 365 was installed on the host machine. And once that was done, we could use the deploy action as part of the deployed task. So that meant that we could run the M365 SPO app install and app deploy commands, because the CLI was already installed. We could run these commands, and the deploy action ran those commands for us. And then finally, we had the run script task, in which we just specified the run script action, and we told that action to send an email to say that the deployment was complete. So that's how we used the Microsoft CLI 365 actions in our GitHub workflow in order to deploy an SPFX project or SPFX solution onto our tenant. Now, the deploy action has got several other parameters as well, with which we can deploy it onto a site collection app catalog as well. Right. And then if you want more commands to be executed as part of this workflow, what you can do is you can use the run script CLI action and specify one or more lines of script, or we can provide we can create a file, a script file with all the commands in it, and then specify that file as the input to this action, and it will make sure that that script gets executed. Right, so that we already saw the demo, and then now before going on to the sorry, excuse me. Sorry about that. Now, before going on to the resources, we just have maybe a few minutes remaining. What we'll do is we'll just look at a couple of actions that we can create ourselves. So an action is nothing but like I said, action is nothing but code that has been written by someone else, which we use in our workflow. So we can go ahead and create these actions ourselves. What GitHub have done is they've created different templates for us under this repository called as actions. So one of this template is a TypeScript action. So what we can do is we can go ahead and download this, and then go to this source folder and then modify the TypeScript file with our own code, and then create an action. So it's pretty straightforward. The documentation clearly explains how all this can be done. And using this documentation, what I have done is I have gone ahead and created this action called as MS-Graph create event. So what this does is whenever there's a say a file pushed onto a GitHub repository, it triggers this action, and it uses something called as PnP JavaScript library, and with that it uses it sets up Microsoft Graph, and then sends, or not sends, actually creates an event in someone's calendar. So the use case might be, say, when there's a pull request submitted onto the repository, we might create an event in someone's calendar, or in the calendar of the owner of this repository to review the pull request, say on the next day or at a certain time in a couple of days, etc. So we can use this particular action for that. Again, the process was quite simple. I just cloned the TypeScript action repository, went ahead into source, and then modified this particular file by injecting all the or by importing all the elements that I needed for the action, and wrote this simple code which goes ahead and uses graph, gets the user by the email address which is specified as part of the action, and then goes ahead and adds an event in their calendar. So creating an action is quite simple. GitHub has a lot of documentation on how to do that, and that's what I've done is, as part of this resources slide, I have put links to all the documentation, and I've also included links for all the GitHub actions that I just explained, and also the link to the blog post that I've written on the SharePoint framework CI/CD workflow. Right, so hopefully that has helped you. So like I said, we started the session by looking at what GitHub workflow is, and looked at the elements of a GitHub workflow. And then we moved on to creating a simple workflow, and then consumed a simple GitHub action. And then when we looked at what Microsoft 365 CLI is, and we looked at the actions that we have created using Microsoft 365 CLI, and then we had a look at a SharePoint framework or a workflow in an SPFX project that use the actions for Microsoft 365 CLI in order to build our SPFX code, package it up, and deploy it onto our tenant, and finally send an email. Right, so that's it from my side. Thank you very much for attending the session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you once again, and take care.